Manever I say ma PENDREAM TV. PENDREAM TV there o see dem yopo.
I have been asking myself, you know, there was elections in Assin in the 2020 elections. Both presidential and parliamentary elections went on. The people decided who they wanted to be president and also decided who they wanted to represent in parliament. And in that election, they were very clear that they wanted His Excellency Nana Akufo-Addo to be the president of Ghana. And so he won in that election, in the presidential election. I think he got a few votes more than former President Mahama. And in the parliamentary election, they decided that they wanted Honorable Gyakye Quayson to represent them. And it appears that from the get-go, the NPP has not been comfortable with that decision. And I have listened to some of their communicators say that why would the people vote presidential for Akufo-Addo and vote parliamentary for an NDC person? And I think that that's quite unfortunate, because these are two distinct elections, parliamentary and presidential, and the people knew who they wanted to represent them. And so they have tried various, means to ensure that they get Gyakye Quayson out of parliament and subvert the will of the people in that parliamentary elections. And that did not begin today. We all know the history of how it started, how they even petitioned the Electoral Commission before the elections. And the Electoral Commission gave hearing to Gyakye Quayson in November 2020. I asked myself that the Electoral Commission opened nominations and closed it. So why did they call Gyakye Quayson back when some NPP persons in the name of concerned citizens of Assin petitioned the Electoral Commission to disqualify Gyakye Quayson? Because the Electoral Commission had opened nomination and closed it. And so once they petitioned the Electoral Commission, and if the Electoral Commission had grounds that the petition had some merit, they would have gone ahead to disqualify Gyakye Quayson. But the Supreme Court had taken a decision which I believe that the Electoral Commission was guided by when the petition was sent to them. You remember that in 2016, the Electoral Commission disqualified some presidential aspirants. One person, in the person of Papa Quayson took the matter up to the High Court. The High Court overturned the decision of the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission was not satisfied, so they went up to the Supreme Court. And if you read that judgment, it will be very interesting to read the judgment that the Supreme Court will be releasing June 7th or 6th. Because in that judgment, the Supreme Court, who in many decisions have held that the Electoral Commission is an independent body, and so what they do must not be interfered by any other body or authority. In the case of Papa Quayson, the Supreme Court virtually usurped the authority of the Commission, reopened nominations, and gave a date for closing. If you read the orders of the court, I think they reopened nominations from 7th of November and closed it on 8th November. It is in their judgment. What was the issue? They said that the Electoral Commission's decision to open and close nomination, that nomination is not an event, it's a process. And so before printing of ballot, before elections, that process must be ongoing, such that if any issue arises out of a person's nomination, that person must be given a hearing and the matter determined. And I think that is the only reason why the Electoral Commission entertained the petition and called Gyakye Quayson to give him a hearing. And when he appeared before the Electoral Commission, it was very clear he had his renunciation certificate. And that's how come they cleared him to contest. If the people were not satisfied with that process, they could have taken the matter up, either to the High Court to review the decision of the Electoral Commission, or further to the Supreme Court if they even thought that there were some issues to be interpreted. But the people went silent. They did not pursue it further. Only for us to see videos of NPP leaders who even before the elections were promising their people that Gyakye Quayson will never be a member of parliament. And that even in the event that the people of Assin North decided that Gyakye Quayson should be the member of parliament for them, they were going to make sure that he is removed from parliament. And I've seen a video of Kennedy Japan, Honorable Kennedy Japan, boasting that the guy would be moved out of parliament even before the elections. And so all the things that started immediately after the elections, when they realized that they had badly, been bruised in the parliamentary elections and parliament was in a hank, they now started fishing for information to attack certain members of parliament on the side of the minority. And that's how come they landed again on Gyakye Quayson. Took it to the High Court, all the drama that happened in parliament on the day of swearing in. We are all witnesses to it. So it's been persistent and consistent machinations to get Gyakye Quayson out of parliament at all cost. Otherwise, persons who have gone to the High Court, as the Constitution, dictates, but per Article 99, you must, if it's about the elections of a member of parliament, it is only the High Court that has the power to invalidate a parliamentary elections, not the Supreme Court. It is in the Constitution, written black and white, that the Supreme Court lacks jurisdiction to invalidate a parliamentary election. And the Supreme Court in many cases have quoted this article in the Constitution and refrained from assuming jurisdiction in invalidating parliamentary elections. So the people went to the High Court. At the High Court, the lawyers of Gyakye Quayson raised an issue of question of law, that Article 94(2)(b), which deals with allegiance, has never been interpreted by the Supreme Court, and that article is ambiguous. It is not clear, because it says that the person is not qualified to be a member of parliament if he owes allegiance to a country other than Ghana. Now here, allegiance is separated from citizenship, because if you check Article 94(2)(a), it's very clear. Citizenship is stated that the person must be a citizen of Ghana, must be 21 years at least, and must be a registered voter. And so in the case of Zanato, the court interpreted 94(1)(a), not 94(2)(b). So when the lawyer Chachukata raised this issue at the High Court, the lawyers for the NPP disagreed with him. In fact, the High Court also disagreed with him and said that that article has been interpreted in the Zanato case, which is different, which is a different article. But whatever it is, these same persons who went to the High Court now abandons the processes at the High Court and also at the Appeals Court and goes to the Supreme Court with a fresh writ, trying to cloud the same matter in another form of constitutional interpretation. And strangely, the Supreme Court assumes jurisdiction and invalidates a parliamentary election, which is against the text of the Constitution. That's very serious. And that's a precedent that, for me, will be very, very bad for the country, because we would be having a lot of parliamentary elections. And if people will be running to the Supreme Court, you know, clothing their petitions in the form of constitutional interpretation, and the Supreme Court is going to assume jurisdiction, then we better go ahead and repeal Article 99. It's of no use. And even repeal many sections in the Representation of the People's law, the PNDC law. Because many of these laws support what the Constitution states in Article 99. So fast forward, they are saying that they have declared the seat vacant. The records in Parliament should be expunged, and all those things. What does it mean to a constitutional democracy? Because I am not a lawyer, but I've been a follower of the law, and so there have been many cases of interpretation that I have been involved in. My case with the Attorney General, the title of the case is Gyakye versus Attorney General, on the U.S. military base in Ghana, the U.S.-Ghana Military Cooperation Agreement. You know, I had gone to court asking the court to strike down the action of the executive. You know, the Minister of Defense sent the agreement to Parliament. The agreement was not signed. But if you check the Constitution, I think Article 75 or so, clearly indicates that the agreement, any agreement that the President enters into, must be put before Parliament. And that agreement must have been executed. And in my understanding, executed agreement means that it must be signed by parties to make sure that the agreement is valid. The Supreme Court, in interpreting that matter, said that they were not going to use a strict technical approach. They were going to be benevolent. They were going to be liberal. They looked for the intentions of the framers. So in the case of Gyakye, what is the intention of the framers in saying that a person's allegiance must be a qualification? And I've pointed out to you that the Constitution, the framers, the drafters, knew that allegiance is different from citizenship. That is why they state citizen at 1A and comes to 2B to state allegiance. Because allegiance in some instances is not permanent. It can be acquired. So if some people have the free will to acquire allegiance, they have the free will to relinquish it. But the ruling by the Supreme Court is simply saying that allegiance cannot be relinquished freely unless it is determined by the country that you hold allegiance to. And so it will be very interesting to see how they systematically arrived at that decision. But we are back to Assin. I want to comment on the decision by the Clerk of Parliament to write to the Electoral Commission. Because if you watch the vetting of the Chief Justice, the nominated Chief Justice, the issue came up. Honorable Afenyo Markins raised the issue that if the ruling of a court is published, and Gyakye, of course, has said he doesn't want to pursue the matter any longer, but he can change his mind. If he decides to pursue it, what happens to the dates announced for the elections and all that? And so I was thinking that the Clerk of Parliament should have waited and not take direction from the Attorney General, who wrote to Parliament directing Parliament to declare the seat vacant without accompanying the judgment of the court. And the person who is affected has the right to go for a review if he meets the threshold. And so that's very problematic, and I think that we must begin to look at that. But in Assin, like I stated, the people wanted Gyakye. I visited Assin after the High Court ruling on the case, and we were in Assin Breku. We visited some chiefs and some opinion leaders, and the kind of testimonies they gave about Gyakye Quayson. I was shocked. In fact, in the palace, I remember whispering to the national chairman at the time, Honorable Ofosu-Ampofo, that look, it's not necessary to pursue this matter further. Let's come back to the people to decide. Because the people espoused the integrity of the man, his selflessness, how even when he was in Canada, how he was helping the constituency from his own resources, how he decided to abandon all the enjoyment, let me put it that way, in the minds of the ordinary Ghanaian that people would have if they were citizens of a country like Canada, and decided to come down, abandon his businesses and everything just to serve the people. And so I'm very clear in my mind that the people are simply going to correct the wrong that has been occasioned by this judgment of the Supreme Court. And it's very clear from some of the social media videos I've been seeing where the people are hooting and ridiculing the NPP attempt to hoodwink them by developmental project, the sudden flooding of the area with earth moving machines and the vote buying gimmicks and everything. And so I know that this by-election is a by-election that will bring justice to the people themselves, because they've been done, a lot of injustice. If you check from the time that Gyakye Quayson was injuncted and what it means by representation, the laws are very clear. If you check the Interpretation Act, or yes, I stand to be corrected, it interprets representation to mean at all times. At all times. And so once the Supreme Court decided that Gyakye Quayson's mandate should be suspended, they had done injustice to the people of Assin because they were without representation. And so the people have an opportunity to speak loudly to authorities of the state that, as the Constitution states, the sovereignty resides in the people. And it is the people that form this Constitution, which form the government, which the judiciary is a part of, which the executive is a part of. And so we are back to the people to decide. And ironically, Gyakye Quayson is still in the picture. So the decision, if Gyakye Quayson is elected on 27th of June, which I firmly believe so, then what would have been the impact of the Supreme Court's decision? What would have been the essence of the decision? Because the person must not hold allegiance to any country as a member of parliament, not when even the Electoral Commission has not accepted whether the person is a candidate or not. Because we must look out for the intention. What is the intention? We don't want members of parliament who hold loyalty to other sovereign countries to sit in parliament and make laws for the people. For me, that is the intention of the framers. And if you want to be liberal, if you want to be benevolent, as they did in my case, you would come to no other conclusion that the framers intended not for anybody to be in parliament whilst the person holds loyalty to another country. But was Gyakye Quayson in parliament at the same time holding allegiance to another country? The answer is no. And so if you come to that conclusion, then it means that the Supreme Court has done grave injustice to Gyakye Quayson and the people of Assin. And so this election, for me, is about bringing justice to the people themselves and to Gyakye Quayson, and also looking at the developmental initiatives by Gyakye Quayson. The chiefs were commending him for some bridges that he had paid attention to, some street lights he had given them I was there myself, and I heard them, and they were even asking whether Quayson could contest again, and the answer is yes, because no law bars him from contesting. And so if he's the person the people wanted, and the Supreme Court has removed him, and he is qualified to contest again, there's no contest. For me, it simply goes without saying that the people will just go back to affirm Quayson. And if you want to test his popularity, check the results, the numbers. What was the name of the late NPP former chairman, Obeche Bilamte? He says the numbers don't lie. If you check the numbers, you would realize that Quayson is very, very popular within the constituency, because he got more votes than the NPP presidential candidate, who even won in the presidential elections. Nana Akufo-Addo won with some 16,000 votes. Quayson won with over 17,000 votes. 2,000 votes more than the NDC presidential candidate. So this is somebody whose popularity cuts across. And so I know that the NPP will deploy all the arsenals. They will do the vote buying like they did in Kumawu, pay money to people on election day, go with to do all kinds of development and everything. I watched the proceedings of the Committee of Parliament on Public Accounts, and you notice that many of the headmasters of the schools from other areas who came were complaining about infrastructure deficit and everything. And the headmaster for Assin said that in the last 6 months, he has gotten more than enough facilities to serve the school, because the NPP themselves, because they knew what they were doing, they were ahead, trying to do all that they can, so that when 27 come, the day comes for the by-election, they will hoodwink the people and say this and what we have been doing in the constituency. So Assin for me is just for Quayson to take. For me, it's not even a matter of NDC NPP. It's a matter of Quayson, the people taking him back, because he has not changed in any form. He's the same Quayson they knew before 2020. He has not changed in character. He has not changed in his approach to the people. Even when he was injuncted, restricting his parliamentary duties, he was still in the constituency with his people. He did not abandon them. He has always been with them. And so Quayson has been taken out. Quayson will be brought back by the people of Assin.
Thank you. Thank you, Broja. Thank you.
Whenever I say PENDREAM TV, PENDREAM TV, there, I see them,